Hello everyone on my channel 1. One Redditor user A shared how their neighbor B called the police on them for having a barbecue in their own backyard on a sunny Saturday afternoon. According to user A, they were minding their business and enjoying a peaceful BBQ with a few friends when neighbor B knocked on their door, demanding that the grill be turned off immediately. Neighbor B, who was known to be uptight, claimed that the smell of the food was disturbing and violated local noise ordinances. They also said it was a fire hazard, despite the fact that the BBQ was safely set up. User A tried to explain that it was a harmless, fun gathering, but neighbor B insisted on calling the cops, resulting in a visit from local authorities. The police were understanding and informed both parties that the BBQ didn't violate any laws. However, the situation didn't end there. Neighbor B became even more passive-aggressive, filing multiple noise complaints against user A in the following weeks. This battle escalated with each side trying to outdo the other with increasingly ridiculous complaints, including ridiculous disturbances like an excessive laughter complaint. The post exploded in Reddit responses, with people strongly siding with user A and labeling neighbor B as a Karen figure. 2. User B lived next to a neighbor C, whose dog would bark constantly, day and night. User B had complained multiple times, but the neighbor ignored their concerns. After a year of sleepless nights and frustration, user B decided to get creative in their revenge. They purchased a speaker and recorded their own dog's barking, then proceeded to play the recordings at full volume during the hours when the neighbor's dog usually barked. The sound echoed through the walls, and user B claimed it worked. The dog didn't bark as much, and the neighbor was furious. The Reddit post went viral, with people debating whether this kind of retaliation was justified or taken too far. Some users applauded user B for fighting fire with fire, while others cautioned that playing the audio might end up causing even more tension. However, many were sympathetic toward user B, as they had already exhausted all other peaceful solutions. Third user C recounted a long-standing feud with their neighbor D, over the placement of a fence. Neighbor D had decided to build a new fence, but placed it a few inches on the user C's property, which didn't seem like a big deal at first. However, as time went on, it became clear that this small encroachment on the property line was a deliberate attempt to extend neighbor D's yard. User C politely asked for the fence to be moved, but neighbor D refused, citing property rights. In retaliation, user C began dismantling the fence a few inches at a time, effectively shrinking it. It wasn't enough to damage the fence or make it unusable, but it was enough to send a clear message. This passive-aggressive approach caused tension, and both neighbors began taking the issue to court. The post received a massive amount of reactions, with many users praising user C for standing their ground, while others warned that legal disputes over property lines can quickly escalate, especially if handled in such an underhanded way. 4. A Redditor, user D, shared their frustration about their neighbor E, who installed a large privacy fence that not only blocked the sunlight from user D's backyard, but also created a sense of confinement. As if that wasn't enough, neighbor E had also installed several security cameras that pointed directly at user D's yard. While neighbor E claimed that the cameras were for security purposes, user D couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. User D decided to retaliate by planting tall, thick hedges along the property line to block the cameras. In response, neighbor E added more cameras, this time placing them higher and aiming directly at user D's house. The cycle continued, with both sides becoming more entrenched in their position. The post drew a large response on Reddit, with people discussing the ethical limits of surveillance and privacy, offering advice on how to handle invasive neighbors without creating an even bigger rift. 5. User E was known for keeping an immaculately manicured lawn. They spent hours each week trimming, fertilizing, and making sure every blade of grass was perfect. Their neighbor F, on the other hand, didn't share the same passion for yard work. User E would frequently criticize their neighbor's lawn, calling it an eyesore and pointing out how the weeds were taking over. The neighbor responded by doing absolutely nothing to address the issue, which infuriated user E even more. In retaliation, user began leaving helpful gardening tools on neighbor F's porch, along with passive-aggressive notes. But when that didn't work, user E went further, pouring fertilizer on the neighbor's yard in the middle of the night. This petty feud spiraled into a constant back and forth of small, annoying pranks, which got increasingly ridiculous. Redditors were divided, with some supporting the effort to maintain a pristine lawn, while others felt it was a ridiculous reason to start a war. Sixth user F lived next to a neighbor G, who had an eye for eccentric home decor. When neighbor G decided to paint their house in loud, unconventional colors, think neon pink and fluorescent green, user F was appalled. They thought the house was an eyesore and that it ruined the aesthetic of the entire block. After attempting to speak with neighbor G about the issue and getting nowhere, user F took action in their own way. They painted their house in an even louder, even more garish set of colors. The result was a war of bright neon paint that left the entire block looking like something out of a cartoon. The post garnered thousands of reactions, with many Redditors commenting on how they would have approached the situation, some advocating for compromise, while others fully supported the petty retaliation. The story sparked intense debate over individual rights versus community norms. 7. One Redditor, user G, had an ongoing issue with their neighbor H, who refused to take out their trash cans on time. The trash would pile up in front of their house for days, attracting flies and a general sense of neglect. Fed up, user G decided to start placing their own trash cans right in front of neighbor H's house. This went on for weeks, with user G actively making it a point to block neighbor H's driveway and front door with their trash bins. Neighbor H finally retaliated by leaving large bags of trash on user G's front step. The war continued, with both sides escalating, each one trying to one-up the other. Redditors found the story both hilarious and relatable, especially those who had experienced similar passive-aggressive neighbor issues. Some commenters also offered tips for resolving garbage disputes through local authorities. 8. A Redditor, user H, lived in a neighborhood with strict guidelines about property aesthetics. Their neighbor I, decided to build a massive above-ground pool that extended slightly onto user H's property. The size and placement of the pool blocked user H's view, and they felt it was an eyesore. They tried talking to neighbor Y about relocating the pool, but the neighbor was unwilling to compromise. In retaliation, user H planted a row of dense, tall hedges along the property line to block the view of the pool. Neighbor I responded by installing large privacy screens in a hot tub right next to the property line. This created a lengthy, ongoing war over what one neighbor considered an ugly pool and what the other considered an outdoor oasis. The post went viral, with users discussing property rights, aesthetics, and how to deal with unwelcome home improvements. 9. User I lived in a cold region, and each winter their neighbor J, had the habit of shoveling snow from their driveway and dumping it on user I's yard. While this may have seemed like a small issue at first, it quickly became a massive inconvenience. The piles of snow made it impossible to maintain the yard, and user I eventually decided to take action. Instead of just letting it slide, user I began piling the snow back onto neighbor J's driveway every time they shoveled their own snow. This created a back-and-forth snow shoveling battle that continued for weeks. Redditors were torn, with some supporting user I's right to retaliate, and others pointing out that it could have been avoided with a simple conversation. Either way, the snow shoveling feud continued to entertain and baffle those following the saga. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos.